focus what she said. I offer my turn because the way she explained to me her personality, all day long I've been thinking about this girl. After you listen to her, then we're going to take it from there. Yes, my brothers and sisters? Yes. Takbir!
Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you, and it's an honor to be chosen to speak with such a variety of very accomplished speakers on this stage, and thank you for yielding your time as well. So I was actually human trafficked when I was 13 years old, and it took me a long time to be able to speak on that. So before I kind of start my presentation, I like to set some ground rules. One, I don't want anyone to think that because I'm at a place where I'm able to speak about my trafficking experience, that I'm further along in the healing process or I've reached some hierarchy of survivorhood that other fellow women, men, children, boys, girls have reached. It's something that this is how I'm choosing to process my trauma and my experience, and anyone else that's dealing with that type of trauma is going to process that and choose to cope differently. So that's just a ground rule I have starting out. Ground rule 2 is that I'm going to be talking about my personal trafficking experience that can be traumatizing, especially in the era of Me Too that we live in currently. This can be very triggering for previous victims of sexual and domestic violence. I'm going to be very frank because I feel like whitewashing, the way we talk about trafficking, does a disservice to everyone. If you are triggered at any point during my presentation, please excuse yourself. I will not take it personally. I completely understand, and there are times when I've had to excuse myself as well. So I just wanted to set those ground rules before I start talking about my personal experience. So let's get into it. I was 13 years old. I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I was a Southern girl. You'll hear my accent coming out. I'll probably say y'all a couple times. But I was a normal kid. I was captain of the volleyball team. I did speech and debate tournaments. I was very actively involved in my parents' Christian church growing up. I was raised very religious. I was part of youth group activities. I was in church choir, dance, drama. They had a number of ministries throughout the week. Unfortunately, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 12 years old. She had stage 3 breast cancer at that time, which developed, she ended up with a double mastectomy. That was very difficult for my family. My dad did intelligence for special forces in the Middle East, so some of you would be familiar with that type of work. That meant that he was gone in places like Afghanistan for much of my life. During my mom's breast cancer, he was also gone, and this created a vulnerability. Now, something that I think is really important to talk about here is what is vulnerability? It's really easy to look at a sex trafficking victim and say, well, maybe it's self-esteem issues. Maybe it's that someone didn't love her enough or someone chose to specifically exploit her just based on her potentially socioeconomic status, something like that. That wasn't true for me. I grew up in a middle-class family. I didn't have self-esteem issues. I had friends. I had loving parents. I had an awesome big brother who was 4 years older than me and very protective. So what does vulnerability look like in the context of my life and my story? For me, it was I needed rides to church events. Like I said, I was very active in youth group, and that was something that was important to my family, that I grew up in a religious, conservative upbringing. And so I needed rides. The person that would eventually take advantage of that and exploit that vulnerability of needing rides to go to religious events was actually a 17-year-old girl that also attended youth group. So she invited me over for a sleepover, which was not uncommon. I was 13 years old. I spent a lot of nights staying over at my friends' houses, things like that, or teammates from sports events. But that was the night that my life changed. I was actually in a church play. She had said, I know you need a ride. She'd given me rides before. We got to know each other. And then on Friday, it was March 23rd, in 2010, that all shifted for me. That was the night that I would eventually be exploited. I was drugged. and then eventually sold to a group of 6 military soldiers on Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Now, let me be clear, there are good and bad people everywhere. Just like there are good and bad police officers, if we're looking at police brutality. There are good and bad people in the US military, there are good and bad nurses, there are good and bad people all over the world. I'm gonna say we're all good people in this room because we're here tonight, right? But the point is can be taken advantage of in any sphere. I was human trafficked and sold from my parents' church to a group of what in the United States is generally assumed to be a group of upstanding, primarily men, but also men and women. But I was sold to a unit of soldiers, and what breaks my heart now as an advocate is I can only imagine what those men did on deployments in places like Afghanistan. And I have to recognize my own privilege as a white woman from a middle-class family and an American citizen, that's why I'm speaking to you tonight. It's not that I'm the only one that this happened to. We have to be intersectional when we look at human trafficking. It's important that I recognize my own privilege of why I'm holding a microphone and why a person of color who had the exact same experience is not. So let me be a voice for them, and a voice and a face that says trafficking victims look completely different than we would imagine. Anyone can be But let's be careful with even the term victim, right? Because it's easy to assign labels. It's easy to assume that someone may self-identify as a victim. When I was 13 years old, I did not. I didn't know how to process what was happening to me. So the way I coped with that was to say that I wanted it, that I was fine with it. My mom was absent, not because she wanted to be, but because she was in the hospital. And my dad was at work, right? And so I didn't have anyone to turn to at that time that I felt comfortable sharing, that there was something that I felt like could be my fault somehow, because society blames individuals that are going through this type of exploitation. Thankfully, through a lot of therapy, I was able to move beyond that. But that was not before I attempted suicide. I was 14 years old. It was Thanksgiving, and that's when I attempted suicide shortly after my exploitation had ended. Once again, in society, we stigmatize people who attempt suicide. It's very easy to lay blame. A lot of times, I find that that even happens within religious organizations themselves. It's very easy to go and look at biblical ties, but we must look beyond that. We must look for the humanity and the love, and that is what I believe Kindness Sharing Project is about. And that is why I'm such an advocate for this exact type of organization. We must acknowledge the humanity in all people, in all situations. No one wakes up and says that they want to rape a 13-year-old girl, and no 13-year-old girl is comfortable having a 28-year-old man touch her, feel her up, and insert himself inside her, right? No one on either side expected that that's how their lives would turn out when they were born. That's not the 4-year-old kid that was kicking a soccer ball. That wasn't anyone that grew up in church choirs or anything like that. So I think it's important to recognize the humanity of all parties, because we all need to be restored. We all have experienced different kinds of trauma, whether that's the perpetrator that was very likely abused in their childhood. And let's be clear, perpetrators are also female. You have female pimps. Madams, especially on the track of the United States, actually about half of the people that are exploiting other people in sex trafficking are actually female as well. So let's debunk those stereotypes. Let's look for the humanity in all individuals, and hopefully we can look at the different faces of trafficking, the different spheres of healing, that somebody is not just a victim or a survivor, that they're a human, right? No one is just a perpetrator, they're also a human. And so with that, I'll leave you all tonight with just remembering that different faces of trafficking, the different places that this occurs, and also the privilege of the stories that you hear. It happens in all spheres. We just tend to hear from people that look like me, unfortunately, other than women of color especially, are highly vulnerable populations. So thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate you all taking the steps to inform yourself and bringing solutions.
God bless you.